So we have two speakers and a moderator this afternoon, Philippa Penfo, CEO and co-founder of People Collider. You can see her on the video there. And then we have Mr. Said Ali Abbas, Chief Strategy Officer, Epitome Global, and my colleague Mei Ling Kwok from Cipd Asia. She's our regional head here. So the flow of the webinar today will be a presentation by Pip and followed by Abbas, and May will moderate the Q&A and the panel discussion. Okay, look, our speakers and moderators now have their video on. So let me bring on Pip. Pip, as the researcher for State of HR and Tech in APAC survey, she brings with her in this webinar very unique insights, into the development and evolution of HR professions as they adapt to Industry 4.0. So I would like to hand the session over to Pip for her to share her thoughts on HR technologies and ecosystem. Pip, over to you if you can share your slides. Are you
I would
able
love
to do
to share it. Not yet.
Not yet, okay.
Not yet. I'll tell you what, let me just use, oops, you've got them on the last slide. I was going to use my slides that you've got there loaded. Can you just move them back to the home slide? They're on the end slide at the moment, just to save time. Can you move them to the front side?
Okay, let me just do
That's
that.
the very end. That's lovely. Let me just do a little, hey guys, technical changes. Let me just move that around so I can drive from here.
Yes,
make sure
let me just do that for you. There you go.
let me drive. That's all right. I'll just say next one, please. If you
You're good.
Drive.
You can do that, Pip,
no,
now. You can try that now.
No, nope, I can't. Not yet. There we are. Okay, tiny little buttons. Just as well I've got my glasses on, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are joining in the world. I'm very happy to share with you for the next 15 minutes 3 key topics that relate to bridging technology and people strategies. I know we've got a short time and I really want to leave time at the end for your questions, and I don't want to take time from Abbas because I know what he's going to share is going to be very valuable for you. So I'm going to skim over 3 key topics as a bit of a groundwork before we move into the practicalities that Abbas will share. We'll talk briefly about HR technology ecosystem design and in analytics and technology. And then I'm going to wrap up on AI and bias. Now, I know you've heard about this before, but I want to share a few changes that are occurring from a legislative perspective, but also to give you deeper insight into what we as HR professionals can do about it. Right, without further ado, let's dive in. Very interesting to see what has happened over the last year with the number of applications HR are using. The Cipd report, it was Cipd, now Cipd Insights. This is a 23-year study that is conducted out of the US on HR technology and the technology that HR as a function use and our approach. Interesting to see that last year, or 2019-20, we were averaging 8.04 tools. If we move forward into 2021, in fact, that increased by over 2. And every size company has also seen an increase. Interestingly, everyone else saw, only the medium saw an increase. Everyone else saw a decrease in cost in spite of the increase in number of applications. Maybe some deep diving is needed to see what we are classifying as HR tech, but I'm sure you will agree it is curious to see price dropping in spite of the number of applications rising substantially. One of the biggest questions we have is HR. So we know we've got a lot of tech, let's say 10 on average, but what is our approach going to be? Do we believe in the one size fits all, one system to rule them all, and with all the functionality, or do we want to build a best fit ecosystem, a bespoke map with tools that are designed specifically for your problems? I don't know that there is the definitive end of each of the continuum is exactly where you want to be. You don't want to be fully integrated. You don't want to be fully best fit. The question is where on that continuum is best for you. You might find that a core system, a core HRIS, that gives you a degree of integration is better, but you need to add the bespoke systems, something that is needed specifically for functionality. Personally, I believe that a combination is best, and I'll explain why a little bit later. It really comes down to the three key problems. So we're talking about the alignment of business and people strategies, or technology and people strategies. If we're putting technology in place, it is there to support the business, whether it's through HR or not. What are the three most important problems that you need to solve? Typically, a one big system only gets you to the starting line from an efficiency perspective, not necessarily to the winning post, the end game. Key systems, targeted systems, bespoke systems that are designed specifically for your problems are usually the best place to go. But we've on this strange, sorry, I just realized I can't use my fabulous pen on this. So when we're looking around at what technology to choose, there's a couple of competing interests, certainly different interests that we need to consider. If we look at it from a business focused perspective, often today the business is saying, give us analytics. I'm sure if you're in HR, you have been, people analytics has been demanded, if not requested. And you're certainly into the expectation that you should be presenting fairly comprehensive analytics. Of course, data fuels technology, and we cannot have the analytics without the data and the technology. But we're used to using technology for efficiency, and that's where it comes into the HR-focused applications. A little in the business as well. I know historically we have been pushed to use technology to achieve efficiencies and cost reductions. And typically in HR, we will do the same. We will rarely, if ever, choose a tool because it makes our life more difficult, even if it makes the employee's or manager's life better. We often choose systems for our benefit, for the smooth, efficient running of the function. And it's easy for us to confuse that with what is an employee-focused application. In fact, we're seeing this a little bit with employee experience and the move towards employee experience. Putting an app, an interface for employees on the front end of an HR tool does not necessarily mean it is employee-centric. Understanding what their problems are and how we can influence the choice of technology for the better, both HR tech and other tech that employees touch, is important. So the three focus areas compete somewhat, but they also mean that we need to be able to represent different stakeholders when we are making decisions about technology. Which brings me to the point I touched on, that technology and data are interdependent and indivisible. If we're thinking today about the technology that we're using and the data that we need, sometimes I'm finding people choosing tech because they want to set a certain data point, or their data points are limiting or enabling the technological tools that they can choose. The choice of technology does influence the data that we use, so the input, the synthesis of that data, how the data is manipulated or combined by the tool, and what is produced, what is the outcome, both directly and indirectly, or desirably and perhaps a byproduct. And because of that, data needs to be seen as both a fuel and an exhaust of technology tools. People of my vintage will know in the old days, we got the data from the employees, we put it into our HRIS, and we produced charts. That was about it. It was a nice, linear, very straightforward approach. But a lot of data today, data points, are being produced indirectly in the course of work, and sometimes unknowingly by employees. Artificial intelligence has played a big role in this. Now, if I ask HR, can you use this data? So you've got data points, you want to use this tool. They say we can do these fabulous things, as most artificial intelligence tools promise. And we say, and I ask, can you use the data? Usually the answer is, if it is legally compliant, yes. And well, we can because it's in the employment contract. Today, though, where we are is having to question, is this enough to maintain the trust of employees? In fact, if we reflect on the Cambridge Analytica saga, we all know what happened with Facebook, Cambridge Analytica. Do you trust Facebook? Did it shake your trust in Facebook? It was independent of whether you actually thought what they did was legal. Most of the time today, we are focused on what is right. And we're in a very beneficial position as business. We hold trust of employees more than any other organization. But we need to rethink this. And I want to work you through a couple of scenarios. I'm going to keep an eye on the chat because I want to know if you think this has crossed the line. Now, all these scenarios I'm going to play you, I want you to assume that they are legally allowable. In some jurisdictions, they are. Everything here is legal in at least one jurisdiction. Whether or not it is in the contract, it is legal to do all of this. And I want to know, is this crossing the line for you? Personally, do you think this crosses the line, breaches the trust of our employees? So in this scenario one, just for the people who are looking on mobile, it's too small to read. Let's say the data from your smartwatch is shared by your employer with your health insurance company so that you get the best deal and coverage that you need. Is that crossing the line? Yes or no? Just a yes or no. Does that cross the line for you? Anybody brave enough? We can maybe let our panelists be the first people to answer. Does that cross the line? It's okay to go with a maybe. Yes, no, or maybe. Oh, thank you, Emily. Lovely. Yes. Okay. Yep. Crosses the line. What about? Oh, and someone said no. Good. I'm good. Glad we've got competing views here. Very common in HR, as you know. What about this scenario? The data that's produced by your email and messenger communications in work, so your work tools, have identified you as a flight risk, and your manager receives nudges for actions that will encourage you to stay. Cross the line? What do you think? Yes? No? What do you think? Depends. Anybody else? Cross the line for you? Are you happy that this data that you are producing in the course of work is being used in this way? No. Okay, not. Yeah, it depends on the encouraging activity. Yes. No. Now it's interesting. Not crossing the line. Interesting. I'm sure we have a lot of HR people on the line that we love this type of tool. Interestingly, employees that are not in HR tend to have a slightly different view. Let's have a look at the next one. Monitoring tools identify when you are looking, where you are looking, when you're looking at a work-related window on your laptop or something else, or even away from your desk when you're working remotely. This has been a common one lately. Does this cross the line? Is this appropriate? Is it appropriate? Do you think it's okay? We can legally do it. There's been a lot of debate about monitoring tools, particularly since we've all been working from home. Does it cross the line? Not okay. Thanks, Andy. Good to see you here, Andy. Yeah, long as not breaching IT policy. Interesting. Okay. What about this last one? All learning activities, all your learning, even this webinar, even if it's had nothing to do with work, all learning activities are collected, analysed, and you are delivered a personalised learning plan for new positions within your company. Okay? Or not okay? Okay use of data? Not okay use of data. Okay. Yeah, I'd like it. Yeah. Now this one is interesting. I want you to have a look at this statement. Sometimes I've tested it both within your organization and deleting within your organization at the end. HR like this idea. This is really good for tracking people and the talent mobility. But through the studies that I've conducted on where the line is for employees, because remember, we're legal, we're HR, we're never going to do anything illegal. That's not the challenge today. The challenge is to work out at what point will we lose or build their trust, the trust of our employees. We know trust is important to our cultures. So One thing I've noticed is this is where it depends. It depends on how much value as an employee we are getting compared to what we're giving to the business. Now, I encourage you to think about this, particularly this bottom right-hand quadrant, because often when we're looking at these tools, scenario 2 was a good example. If we have our HR hat on, we think it's okay because the business value is high. Now, a lot of these tools we use because the benefit to the business is very high. We rarely do things in the top left-hand corner, rarely, because we arguably will not get the funding for it. But the things on the bottom right are actually where we start to run into trouble, and we need to be aware of the issues at hand. Where you want to be using, so when you're looking and analyzing the tools that you need, the business problems you're solving, the tools you need to solve them, and the data you need to feed into those tools, you need to think about what is the value for the employee. At the top of the pyramid, there's a reason why they are at the top. The bottom, the HR and business are necessary, but without considering what is in the best interest of the employee, you run the risk of breaching this trust. Okay, I want you to get on to Abasa. I'm going to whiz through my last few slides. I'm going to take you just very quickly through the ultimate basics. In case if you know AI, you can switch off. But I want to go into the bias idea, because we talk about bias a lot, and a lot of the tools that we're looking at that we want to feed data are powered by artificial intelligence. And the data we put in may be biased. I want to really everyone to really understand what we are talking about when we talk about bias in AI. So the most important thing is to think about where AI begins. It starts with a model. Okay, sorry, this is a little error. It's supposed to pop in later on. An AI model. What's a model? A model is, I always think of it like a recipe. A recipe made up of training data, like the ingredients, and the algorithms, which is the instructions. So, you look at any recipe, it's got the ingredients and how to mix it. Our AI models are built from the training data, the ingredients, and the algorithms, how to mix it, the instructions. Then that model, now there are models all over the place for free. A vendor might pick up a model that has been built and say, okay, I'm going to develop a product around that model. It might be a recruitment tool, for example, and they package it, they use the model, they package it nicely, and they sell it to us. And then we put our data into it, okay? And then we get an output. Now, with machine learning, as was always the case, that output also becomes an input. So we feed the output back into the model, back into the tool. There are 3 places that bias creeps in that process. First of all is that training data set, the ingredients list. If the model has been trained on data that's biased, it's learned how to be biased. It's learned the patterns of bias. The algorithms, the instructions, these are often capturing the biases of people who write them. And our data. But even if we have a very small one, because our output is continuously feeding in, we are teaching it and magnifying our bias over time. So there's actually 3 areas we need to be very aware of, both from data and the technology, to understand if we're going to have a problem, where there could be a problem. And subsequently, we need to interrogate, and I do mean interrogate vendors to make sure that they are able to answer these questions satisfactorily. How do they screen their data, their training data, those ingredients, to understand the bias? They should have a report that they can share. Are the algorithms audited? There are a number of independent bodies or subject matter experts that can audit them. In fact, there is law coming in January 2022 in New York City that is going to make it mandatory for all tools that are used in hiring to have the audit completed. Does the client help you test for bias both before and after deployment? If they just put it in, say, off you go, there you go, that's not good enough. We need to monitor it and analyze it for bias once your data's gone in, and continuously monitor it post deployment. I always think of AI like a 2-year-old. You wouldn't leave a 2-year-old unattended. You would never leave AI unattended, unless you have a death wish, of course. And then the 4th is your approach to data governance. This comes back to the idea of trust and the principles upon which data is managed in your company, not in HR, in your company, because all data ultimately is business data. So you need to make sure that you've got the right approach to data governance and that their approach to data governance is going to match up. There was the quick fire. I am very happy to take questions at the end of this, but right now I'm going to turn myself off so I can hand over to Abbas. Thank you.
Thank you, Pip. That was very lovely, and thank you. I thought that was a lot to take in for me. Lots of wonderful stuff. I really like the quadrant that you have about, how data can benefit not just organizations, but also the employee, the value also to the employees, not just the organization. So I'm sure we have a lot to discuss during our panel session later. Thanks for that, Pip. So let me now bring on our second speaker, Mr. Syed Ali Abbas. Abbas is the Chief Strategy Officer of Epitome Global, and he has served as Group HR Director for Global Fashion Group, and he was also Chief HR Officer for PacNet Group and Executive Director of HR for APAC and India at AT&T Inc. Abbas is also the Executive Council member of SHRI and Board Nominations Committee member of AWA. He is also a mentor at the Workplace Accelerator and angel investor in people tech space. So Abbas, over to you on the next segment on putting all this tech into practice.
Thank you, Charmaine. And
Let me put you on screen and put your slide on. Sorry about that.
brilliant. Yeah, when
yes.
people read my bio nowadays, I realize that I'm getting old. There's a few things on it now. So, nevertheless, Charmaine, just quick question: can I scroll through the slides now with?
Yes, absolutely. Oh, wait, not yet. I have
Yeah.
not set that up for you. Just give me a sec, okay?
Brilliant. So while you're doing that, I think for all the folks who are on the webinar right now, I think so. Pip and I know each other. We go back ages, and one of the things that we try to do if we are speaking to a group of people together is sort of segregate what we are talking about. And I think Pip is fantastic at explaining sort of the concepts and sort of explaining how to channel our thinking and what we want to do. And then I'm sort of able to bring in sort of the practitioner side of it in terms of the nuts and bolts of how to get it done in your own business and sort of get things implemented. So that's sort of the approach we'll take today as well. Charmaine, I'm still looking for the slides. I can only access Pip's slides, not my own.
Okay, can I just check that everyone is able to see the slide Bridging Your Technology and People Strategies? If you can, could you give me a acknowledgement in the chat group, please?
I can still see Pip's slides.
Okay.
I just flicked the switch button. So I think that you can see it now, yeah? Okay.
Yep, got it.
Are we all good?
Yes. Thank you very
let me
much,
just
Charmaine.
confirm with the participants. Can all the attendees see it as well? Can we have an acknowledgement in chat, please?
Okay, folks, there's just under the 4 thumbnails of the videos of us, there's a little tab that comes up, that floats up, that says viewing. So you could actually choose which deck you want to view. So there's view intro deck or view Abbas CIP technology. So try to use that tab and see if it works for you or not. The other option is Charmaine, if you have you.
Should I just share the slides directly?
I think it's okay now because you've removed the CIPD ones.
Yeah.
Great.
Can we all see it now? Ansley, can you confirm? Okay, great.
Brilliant. Can I proceed?
Thank you. Yes, please, Abbas. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Um, so what we'll talk about today, we'll keep it short. I think just 4 concepts. So first, I think one of the things we wanted to talk about today when we are setting up this session was, oh, glad, Andy, glad you've got the access now as well, was why has HR been a laggard in technology adoption? Then we talk a bit about how to plan and evaluate HR tech initiative solutions, etc. And then just some, sharing in terms of lessons learned in my sort of 20 years plus rolling out everything from the good old ERP on-premise sort of SAPs and Oracles and Spectrums and all sorts of other names, all the way to the latest and greatest stuff that is happening in the startup space right now. So without further ado, I think why HR is a laggard. I mean, there are many theories. People say change management is not done well. People say business requirements are not done well. People say HR people don't understand tech. People say the CFO is driving it because of cost. IT is driving it because of the tech stack. My view is that there's a more fundamental issue with HR tech that has been around for a couple of decades, which is now slowly going away. So I think it's almost like a sort of what people call a vicious circle. So essentially, in the 1980s, when finance and accountants became CFOs, when IT managers and network managers became CIOs and CTOs, and where procurement managers and logistics managers became supply chain leaders, HR continued to be personnel management. And we continued in that space, not just from where the business perceived us, but from where we ourselves perceived us, all the way to the late 90s, early 2000s, where Dave Ulrich did his whole human resource champions, HRBP, that model. And, I mean, that model may be very outdated now, but it set a bit more, it set a whole generation of HR people who are just entering the workforce. I can speak from personal experience on a path where we thought more about business impact and organization impact in terms of what we're doing, but also in terms of, the business seeing us as people who are trying to help them rather than just be the policy police. And, because of that head start other functions got on us in the 80s and 90s, they attracted better talent and got better resourced. Therefore, they drove corporate strategy and enterprise tech in terms of corporate stuff. And finance rolled out SAP, and that's why HR was asked to join with SAP. The logistics guys rolled out Ariba or something else, and that's why we were asked to do a single sign-on, which would allow employees access. And therefore, HR's business case activity for tech was very much as a cost center and very much to automate activity. So we were not thinking about how to have growth, not just for the business, but for people, and also how to have organizational impact. And that led to a very high failure rate to achieve all objectives by HR tech startups. I put a 70% because that's the industry sort of received wisdom. Depending on which survey you read, it could be 50%, it could be 80%. And this circle continued for a long time until the past 10 years ago, where we can see there's a different way of looking at people. There's a different expectation from HR. And very crucially, the new generation of HR people now in the workforce have a different understanding, have more confidence, and they are ready to be HR people and not afraid to say it, rather than saying, oh, we're HR, but we want to understand finance like a CFO or understand tech like a CIO. We are proud to be HR, and that's critical. And for me, that is a very good start we've had, but we need to sustain that. And the way I think we need to sustain that is we, more than anyone else in the business, have to balance head and heart, right? Heart comes quite easily to us, right? We understand that instinctively as HR people, we deal with people in our business and outside all the time. That one is easy for us. And I fear at times we rely too much on that, or we gravitate towards that because it's a comfort zone. But to really be exactly the same as finance, IT, and so on, in today's business world, we need to have the head side of it as well. So whenever I'm sort of going for an HR tech initiative, I will actually go through this sort of basic 5-point checklist, right? So firstly, I do the spade work to understand where we are today, right? So where's the business? What are the challenges in terms of people? What's the business trying to achieve in general? What is HR mandated to do? What do people expect HR to do? It makes no sense to set up an HR function that is going to function like Google if what people want you to do is, what is done by a local cigarette manufacturing company in Indonesia. So you have to understand the context in which you're operating and how much funding you have, and then look at the HR function and the team, and understand where we are today and how ready or not ready are we to where we need to go tomorrow in terms of using HR tech. And this, quite frankly, this applies to any HR transformation. It's not just tech, but anything else that you do in terms of rolling out a new way of doing things. Now, then there's homework, which is very critical. You need to understand the business strategy. You need to understand the key metrics for HR and so on. And externally, you need to understand what's going on outside in the world at large in this space. And the reason for that is, and we will talk about this in a bit, you don't want to be dependent on finance, IT, HR consultants, HR vendors, or the cool book picked up by your business leader at the airport before they take a long distance flight, the work rules or whatever, to drive your HR tech strategy. That does not work. So you need to credibly have enough information and knowledge yourself and build it so that then you can go into the next phase of developing strategy where you identify what needs to be done, identify the options in the market for that, and what your target results are, create the plan, get the budget, and ideally, everything works out and you have a successful rollout. Now, for that successful rollout, there's a lot of planning needed. So whenever I talk to HR people in this space, everybody is obsessed with change management. How do we do the change? How do we do the culture change? Yes, change management is very important, but you know what's even more important? Project management. If you don't have a proper plan, proper timelines, everybody knowing what they're doing and delivering, all sorts of chaos can happen. You can lose your timelines, you can have an unsuccessful rollout, you can go over budget. And these all sound like very boring, basic, execution business responsibilities. But to really be successful in HR tech and rolling that out, no matter what kind of tool you're rolling out, it is absolutely critical. And then finally, as I always say, execute, execute, execute. Again, a very American, jargony business term, but it gets the message across, right? I mean, you got to roll it out, get the changes done. Yes, use change management. Yes, communicate well, but also keep the discipline to monitor what's going on, maintain what you're doing, and adjust over time. So, just a sort of checklist that I use overall to drive any such initiative. Now, next question. We have the checklist. So how do we choose what's the best solution? So the question always comes up, what's the best employee engagement HR tech solution? What's the best learning management system? What's the best talent marketplace? The reality is there is no best. It really depends on who you are and what you're trying to do as an HR person or as a business. So here are the 10 factors that I think you can use to evaluate what works for you and what doesn't work for you. So does it meet the business needs? Does it operate seamlessly as part of the larger organizational context? So again, you can't bring in something that is space age technology, which is consumerized, gamified, and depends on bring your own device kind of environments where anything goes, when your company says you can only use Microsoft machines bought from HP and you can only use these kinds of phones which have corporate software on them. So you have to understand context, otherwise you're going to fail at the first step. Understand, does it fit with the HR mandate? Does it actually use design thinking to solve a problem, not just automate existing processes? Is it really solving a problem, or is it an HR tech solution for the sake of having an HR tech solution? Does it fit into the IT strategy? Fit doesn't mean comply. Fit means, does it actually work, right? So again, you cannot do something which just is not going to work. You can negotiate with IT how to make your work fit into their strategy over time. But what you cannot do is, if everyone else is, on Android, you bring in something that is iOS. A silly example, because nowadays everything works on both Android and iOS. but you know what I mean. Sound financials, CapEx ROI, very common. TCO, total cost of ownership, absolutely critical. It's like when you buy a house, you actually don't just have to worry about the installment, you have to worry about the property tax every year, the maintenance costs. What happens if, the water pipe bursts? Who's your person who's going to come and fix it? All those things you think about as a landlord or as a car owner for your car, that's how you have to think about a system, because what the vendors will always do is they'll just tell you, oh, you just have to pay us a monthly license fee or annual license fee per user, and that's it. That's all it is. And then the costs come crawling out of the woodwork later once you've installed the system. Um, Obviously, tangible outcomes, so growth, cost, efficiency, and intangible outcomes. So employer branding, attraction, retention, productivity, collaboration. Um, Risk mitigation. So this is where a lot of the stuff that Pip talked about, data science, biased AI, data privacy, obviously employment law, make sure you have the right vendors. So yes, it's wonderful to have startups deliver solutions, but then if they're vaporware means they disappear after a couple of years. It's not really going to make you very popular as an HR person who implemented that. So you need to do, and the same thing with, if you roll out some major ERP solution that is so clunky that any small change you need to make cost you $500,000, that's also not going to make you popular with anyone. So pick your vendor carefully, and the dependencies. So if you are implementing traditional ERP systems, but the rest of your business is going the startup way or vice versa, you need to make sure that you're talking and getting the larger context so that the IT team can still support you, or your grand plans, right? And finally, evolving using metrics and feedback. And feedback, I put this at the bottom of the list, but really it starts at the top, because your solution should be based on user feedback, whether it is the business leaders, your employees, or contractors that you serve, or the HR team itself, or external stakeholders. So I think now that we've talked about, okay, how do we plan? How do we evaluate and choose something? Then we get to the point where you've chosen it and you're rolling it out. So this is where I put my do's and don'ts. I'm not going to go through all of them, just going to point to a few, but the initial first principle always stands, that you should start your exercise of rolling out technology in your company from a people perspective with the problem in mind, not the solution in mind, right? So yes, Culture Ramp is amazing. I've used it, and I would love to implement it in every company, but it's not going to work in every company, right? For various reasons. Yes, Engage Rocket is a great alternative to Culture Ramp, but the same problem applies, right? So you need to really think about, my problem could actually be solved by using Tiny Pulse, which is just tiny little. It literally does what the name says: tiny little pulse surveys, and that's it. I don't need a big employee engagement tool, even if it's coming from a cool startup or from the big stuff from Mercer, Sirota, or Towers, or whoever. Consider your options. So considering options is absolutely critical, so you don't get pushed into a choice that is not a real choice, right? So you need to understand your options and pick that. Homework we talked about, right? You need to do the homework to understand what you get is what you need, because there is no such thing as a perfect HR tech solution. There literally isn't. Obviously, you need to get your business case built on a combination of head and heart, as I said before. And the solution, um, I do believe you need to involve the IT and purchasing colleagues early, um, but not to the point where they are driving the conversation. Now, I will speak in the defense of our IT and purchasing colleagues. The reason they're driving the conversation in a lot of companies is because HR has not done the homework on the commercials and the technology and the vendors. So because of that, the other people take control. But if you go to them with research and homework, like both Pip and I have recommended, you will find that they're listening to you. They will say, you're the expert, we follow you. Just tell us how to get the best deal for you. Yeah. Do not follow what the sales guys in the HR tech vendors and the system integrators and consultants are telling you. Of course, there's a conflict of interest. I've learned a lot from people like that, but they should not be leading your discussion. They should be supporting your initiative. Full disclosure, this is quite obvious. You need to understand the bells and whistles. And of course, you need to have all stakeholders on board. I remember a hilarious story I heard from someone else where they were rolling out an HR platform. Um, and story number one, stakeholder in terms of HR all over the world was not on board. So then inevitably what happened was they cut a lot of HR staff, but then the business hired a lot of shadow HR staff to do exactly what the previous HR people were doing. Stakeholder number two, people did not talk to other corporate functions. They did this huge plan, massive program of workshops, user onboarding, this, that, change management, blah, blah. And then 2 weeks before launch, they realized that they were launching PeopleSoft, and the procurement team and supply chain team was launching a similar large ERP solution within 1 week of each other. It was an absolute disaster because then suddenly the company was expected to swallow two massive self-service complex systems within a week of each other. And then it became a game of chicken about who delays their rollout and messes up their budget and messes up their plan. So these are very obvious things, and I've just flown through them so we have the time for Q&A. But I'm hoping this gives you enough of a checklist to sort of get some of the stuff done on the ground without falling into some of the pitfalls that I have personally fallen into and learned the hard way in the past. That's it from me. Back to you, May and Charmaine.
Thank you, Abbas. Wow, that was a lot. A lot to in, a lot to digest. I was writing down a lot of wonderful notes that you have said there. Yeah, the checklist and what you said about, fit doesn't mean it's comply, it really has to work. And, not allowing the tech side to take the lead, or rather to learn from them rather than leading some of the service provider. So very thank you very much. That was very powerful and very insightful for me. Yeah, I'm going to now bring on May, my colleague, who is going to take over the panel and Q&A session. May has worked in the professional development and education sector for over 15 years. She joined the CIPD in 2006, managing professional membership team to counsel and benchmark people management and development practitioners into chartered membership. So May, take it away from here for our final segment. I think it's good if we can have the two speakers, Abbas and Pip, to also turn on your video if you have not already done so. Let me change my screen.
Okay, great. Thank you, Charmaine, for that. Thank you, Abbas and Pip. So folks, if you've got any questions for us, feel free to put them into the chat box or in the Q&A section. In the meantime, I'll kick off with a few questions of my own. So Pip, at the start of the conversation, you started talking about HR's role in the tech ecosystem, the tech design ecosystem. What do you see as that role?
Oh, nice big question to start with. If only we had hours, not minutes. Look, I think we need to lean in. If I think about where we are today, I think Abbas really highlighted it well. We are relinquishing a lot of our responsibility to or letting IT or procurement take control of it. I think regardless of whether we're looking at technology for HR or technology that is going to affect employees, I believe HR have a voice that needs to be heard. Every technology that touches our employees affects and influences the employee experience. That should matter to us. I think we need to be able to work out how to learn enough to engage. It was like, 20 years ago, we were learning the language of the business so we could engage with business people and connect with them. Not so we knew what to do with finance or what to do with marketing, but so we understood what it was that they were doing and we could communicate with them. I think at the moment we are lacking the vocabulary and the understanding to be able to engage with them, and in sometimes driving them rather than letting them take the lead, even if it's technology that is not specifically HR technology, but technology that we can see is going to influence our people significantly. So yeah. It's a bit of capability. I think it's a bit of confidence we're so used to letting them drive it. You know, they're happy to do so. And it also means sometimes we don't have to work with them, you know, so we just step back and it's easy. You know, let's face it, we've got a lot going on. It's nice to leave this stuff and not have to worry about it. But I think that we are doing both ourselves, but definitely our employees a disservice. We have not developed the ability to engage and drive a lot of these decisions. Abbas,
Just to
what do you think?
share, I completely agree, and I'm actually going to share a very specific use case of something I did in my team at GFG. So for those of you who don't know GFG, it's an e-commerce major listed now. It is the parent company of Zalora in Asia and Namshi in the Middle East, for those of you who shop for fashion online. In GFG, after 1 year of transformation, I actually hired a person from Australia, I remember, and I put her in the London office because geographically it worked well for a global business, as the head of employee experience within the HR team. But here's the fun part. Her job was not just HR systems, HR policies, HR onboarding, candidate engagement, employer branding, etc. Her job was also to go beyond HR to look at finance policies, finance systems and processes, IT policies and processes and systems, procurement, and look at all of them with the eyes of the employee and make them better for an overall better employee experience across the business. So if we start thinking along those lines, we can actually do new things, and the business supports it. The business and the employees all say, yes, HR is doing something different, and it just makes sense. You're making our lives easier rather than the usual stuff of, oh, here's another employee engagement survey, and here's another annual action plan, which, you know, is never going to get done.
Yeah, I think that's a fascinating role of us. And you know, if we were to sort of flip it over, the different languages that they need to speak and the different capabilities. Yes, they need to have HR understanding, but they've also got to be able to talk to every business, have some type of skill set from design thinking point of view, UI, UX, it all matters.
Exactly.
And this is why I think HR is so beautifully poised to extend our what we are doing, our role in the business, because that fundamental understanding about, you know, the human being, we've got that. That is one of the hardest things to develop. Learning the language of tech or procurement or legal, UI, UX, it's comparatively easy. So thanks for showing the example of that. I think it's a great one. Sorry,
so I'm going to jump in here. I'm going to jump in here on that because so far between the both of you, I've heard you both refer to knowledge and capability here. And that's something that we didn't quite touch on or address in a bit more detail. So I just want to use the time now. Obviously, we don't know what we don't know. For a lot of HR practitioners, the tech space is still relatively new. You know, we're probably slightly behind the journeys that the two of you have actually both gone on. So you're a little bit ahead of the rest of us. So if we come with the concept of we don't know what we don't know, what would you guys both feel should be a bare minimum that HR practitioners should understand, should know, in order to be able to speak credibly when we're dealing with this tech space? Pip, do you want to start?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, mate. And unfortunately, this answer is a moving target, because if we look at technology, it is changing so much. You know, what we know about blockchain today will not be blockchain 5 years from now, or AI, or ARV, or any of them, or how our businesses are using them. And you're right, we need to be aware of what we don't know to go and find out. And, you know, it reminds me of my early journey. I used to rock up to events. I had no idea what they were talking about. I get that, do the introduction, that was me done. I didn't get it. I had to just keep sitting there and absorbing this stuff so that I knew what to Google. You know, what I didn't know, so I could Google it. You have to be aware of what you don't know to make good use of Google. And I'll be honest, with the exception perhaps of CIPD, and I'm you know, not saying that because it's a CIPD, but if you look at the studies that CIPD have done in the space, there are very few organisations, HR organisations and associations that are trying to articulate that gap, do that training needs analysis for HR people and fill that gap with tech, you know, with training. Beyond CIPD, there's relatively few. And, you know, HR people, if we could do coaching or well-being or diversity program versus robotic process automation, we're probably going to go to a D&I than an RPA. So there's the desire to learn, and that is the other issue. Are we actually interested in learning? But if we fast forward and look at the Cognizant report, so that was a really interesting one, the 21 new jobs for HR. There was some really, interesting stuff there, some cool, some funky, some pretty far-fetched. And if we'd looked at that 10 years ago, I think even Abbas and I would have scoffed at it. It looks a bit crazy, but I think we need to think crazy. I think we've got to growth and change do not happen in our comfort zone. We all know that. And it is very easy for us to stay here rather than go and sit in a session where we may not understand anything but the introductions for a while, to figure out and consume information like what a Cipd is putting out, and do assessments, assess each other. We know what a TNA is. We've been doing it for decades, a lot of us. This is not unusual. Apply our knowledge to ourselves and try and figure it out. So because the learning journey is different for everybody. If only there was a simple answer, May.
I mean, I would follow that with three very basic thoughts, right? And basic as in really basic, right? So number one, there is no substitute for hard work. So I can tell you the reason why I got to a point where I was the guy who was thrown into projects early in my corporate life or had access to information that others didn't was because I was reading like a madman, right? So at some point you have to do the work, number one, right? Number two, a great way to get out of doing the work is by networking with people smarter than you. So attend the webinars, go to the conferences, and you will learn the précis version of all those books that you should have read or the articles you should have read, right? So I found that was a wonderful shortcut. I went through 4 or 5 years of really hard work, reading everything under the sun, and then I realized I talked to a few people smarter than me, and I get the benefit of that knowledge in 15 minutes instead of 15 days. Right?
What do you think we're doing right now?
Well, I don't, you would just have Pip as fitting that category. I'm sort of a bit old and stale. And number three, very important, apart from the hard work and apart from the networking, I think it's also having the ability and the confidence to sort of step out of where you are. So, everybody talks about the growth mindset, right? That's all it is. Ultimately, you just need to sort of say, you know what? I'm never going to be an expert on AI, but if I scratch below the surface, AI is, pattern matching, predictive analytics, which is basically forecasting. It's just an intelligent version of forecasting. I can understand forecasting. I'll never really understand RPA, but hey, UiPath is doing a free half-day workshop on how to build an RPA bot. Why don't I just go volunteer, take time out from work or out of my personal, and just go do it? Right? So don't be afraid to step out of that sort of box that you're in. And when you combine that with your reading and your networking, I think it's, even though it suspiciously sounds like that whole 70-20-10 thing, but it actually works, right? It actually works.
All right. Okay. Good advice. So we've got a few questions from the chat box here.
Great.
Question number one. What are your thoughts on how HR professionals and technology can work together to mitigate bias? So who would like to take that first?
Good question. Good question.
I'll take that as
First of all, so if we think about the people, so yes, we've got to mitigate bias. We know we need to do something about it. Legislation is coming in, so that's the first thing. And on the back of a lot of the work that's been doing, there is talk about standards, like ISO standards, where we can have confidence in what we're buying, that it has been monitored or measured and validated, that it is reaching a certain level. Personally, I think that is necessary, but not sufficient. To say that something is not biased because it fits the 4/5 rule, which is, if you know American law, that's what it is. That does not mean it's not biased. It just means it complies with the 4/5 rule. It's not this to say just because it's legally compliant does not mean it's not biased. It just means the bias is not contravening any legislation. So it's going to be, so it's necessary, but not sufficient. We need to be aware of the legislation that is coming up and the discussion around AI and ethics. we're not going to solve the ethics debate anytime soon. We've been struggling with it for hundreds of years. Just because AI here doesn't suddenly mean we're going to be able to answer all these questions. That's why I think HR are actually very well placed to participate in these discussions around the ethics of artificial intelligence. Clearly, I see a very clear role for HR in all of this stuff. So we've got legislation, we've got standards. Let's assume HR have the conversation. HR are able to talk to the developers, to their vendor, and their vendor has a process for monitoring. So any good vendor will have an ongoing process where they're doing a deep dive analysis into the output, and they are discussing it with their clients to be able to work out, not necessarily is it biased, as in is it illegal, but is the way the data is leaning, is that where you want it to be? Is it producing a valid outcome, depending on what the purpose of the tool is? Unless we in HR can be the ones having that conversation, and we need to be, because that's not IT's issue. This is not, you wouldn't give a discrimination case over to IT to solve, they'd be giving it to us to solve. And I think, so 3, if you think about it from a risk mitigation perspective, there are multiple lines of defense. It's not one that you just say, okay, one and done. So legislation, standards given, but we have to be able to work more collaboratively and stay on top of it. And this is a moving piece. Yeah, I spend so much time reading. It's a huge piece.
I think absolutely. And I think from a day-to-day perspective, when you're meeting salespeople from companies selling HR tech to you as an HR professional, I think you have to be extremely careful and wary when somebody says that their tool does AI and machine learning, and they've got a certification from some impressive sounding organization that says that their data is fine and there's no bias. Because the reality is a lot of the stuff that's going on in terms of assessments, in terms of video interviewing, where they're looking at how many times your eyes are blinking or your facial expressions, and all sorts of other stuff in terms of the data that's being collected. It's not just that the technology and the data that the technology is hoovering up is itself flawed in some ways. So if you could have 20 million data points in the US, but you have only 25 data points in Singapore, your data is not going to be very valid in Singapore to predict how people react. It's normal logical stuff, right? So it's not just that which is a problem, or the fact that a lot of times people don't really have algorithms. They're just hard-coded decision trees, which are putting you in a box. Hidden behind the scenes, all the intelligence is actually not intelligence, it's just a box, right? So, but I think the other problem is the business requirements themselves and the approach that is being taken itself could be flawed. So I think, this is one of those cases where buyer beware. Please do your homework in terms of knowing what you want to do, but also asking very pointed questions. How much local data do you have? How much work have you done in this situation? How much work have you done in this use case? How much have you operated in this country? Etc., etc., etc. How is your survey or your assessment or your conclusions actually validated? Or is it just some guy in a university made it for you, or you have some intelligent people in your company? If there's no validation, it's useless anyway. So you have to be very careful in the vendor space these days, because there's a lot of AI. There was actually an MIT guy who did a study which talked about, literally the title of that report was AI snake oil in the HR tech space. And it had some very prominent members of the HR tech ecosystem today named in it, for people who are going out and selling AI when they didn't necessarily have it.
Yeah, there are a lot. Just to reiterate on that, there, in fact, I don't want to mention any names, but there was a big one that has the first domino to fall in my mind, one of the very big ones, and it has been proven as snake oil, which any HR person, if you just take the blinkers off for the bright shiny AI, which we can easily do, we know it's not. It was too far-fetched, but it was very prevalent, very well regarded, and used by some of the biggest companies in the world. So it's we'll get into that case study another day.
It sounds like we just need to stay logical, You know, don't be too impressed by the flashing lights and the you know, all that wonderful stuff, and just be logical. I think
Trust but verify. Trust but verify.
Absolutely. Right. One
Interrogate.
last question. Interrogate. But you need to be knowledgeable to interrogate. Okay. Right.
Yes.
One last question. Do you observe any accelerating trend from HR tech to work tech? Work tech being tools built for people to do their jobs better versus HR tech. And then in brackets, it's silo solutions that predominantly make HR's work easier.
So, I mean,
It's a great question.
It's a great question. My initial reaction to it is, I think, you know, it also depends on how you define HR tech and work tech and people tech and learn tech. And, you know, there's a lot of labels flying around in the past few years. Work tech, from my understanding, is really about helping people work better in terms of remote work, wellness, productivity, etc. And yes, that's absolutely a great thing to do compared to a lot of the HR tech focuses, which is more an enterprise or organization focus of trying to apply things to a range of people, right? So I think it's a very good conclusion to say work tech works better for individuals than HR tech. In most cases, I've seen HR tech that is amazing, and I've seen work tech which is absolute rubbish. But the reality of it is, I'm concerned about the labels because we don't see accountants going around and saying, here's employee reimbursement tech, and here's financial planning tech, and here's this and here's that. I fear we are overcomplicating things by labeling it. So I actually, nowadays, I just say people tech. And, you know, whether it's HR tech, work tech, whatever tech, you know, as long as it relates to people, I say it's people. Even ed tech, to an extent, I roll into that, because I don't want to confuse people who are outside HR by giving them 4 different labels that they may not understand the definitions of. So yes, work tech works better for people a lot of times than HR tech, but I would say, you know, let's shy away a bit from the labels.
Pip, very quickly.
I'm a big fan. I'm a big fan of not doing labels. Yet it's interesting to see the move from HR-focused functionality and tools to employee-focused functionality and tools. For that, I like the labels. I think the most important one to me, and we've seen a lot, you know, whether it's workforce planning in the hands of management and talent development, learning and development in the hands of employees. But for me, the most important thing is actually working out where it needs to be in your organization. You know, so where is the line in the sand? And actually, I love the idea of being able to say that is work tech. Let's put that in the employee space. You know, let's take out everything but the big efficiency tools that we need to run to keep the function working. But to make work better for employees, we're going to put that at the front. It helps, again, that pyramid, separating from a budget perspective, separating from requirements, how we're thinking, ownership, and so on and so forth. Even the business case vary. So the question is, where do you want to draw the line within your business?
Yeah.
Thanks. So I'm just going to summarize this segment very quickly because I thought there was a lot of takeaways there. So number 1, I would say upgrade your knowledge in this space because it's just going to keep moving forward. So you might as well start on it now. Number 2, when it comes to dealing with vendors, if it sounds too good to be true, then it's probably too good to be true. So apply some common sense and verify. And number 3, start getting involved, get stuck in there. That way you can start building some confidence and don't be afraid of this area and this topic. Don't let just IT and procurement be there. Make sure you're there too. So those are 3 things that I think I took away from that. Thank you for that segment. I thought that was very invigorating. Back over to Charmaine.
Yeah, thank you very much. I really enjoyed that session so much. I think there's so many things that we discussed that's really worth spending a lot more time to really think through. So really a huge thank you. There were a few mentions of reports, research, and what we have. I just wanted to take the last minute or so to just allow everyone to have a view of some of the things that we are doing at Cipd. If you want to find out a bit more about transformative text for HR, you could actually scan this QR code and we'll be able to send you the information on this piece. And you can also stay connected with the Cipd Abbas mentioned earlier, right? A lot of reading and then networking. Stay connected with the CIPD. There is a lot of research that we have done, a lot of fact sheets, guides that you can actually have access to. Just go to our website, or you can get connected through our LinkedIn, Facebook, and from these places, you will be able to get the latest updates on what's happening in the HR profession. Okay, so with that, I want to thank everyone for this session. A big thank you to Pip and Abbas for your wonderful presentation and sharing of insights. And May, thank you very much for moderating the session. So for the attendees, just to let you know, for questions that we are unable to cover this afternoon, not to worry, we have noted them down. And what we will do is then we will respond to you directly either via email or we will be in touch with you. Okay, so thank you again, everyone, for attending the session. I hope you have enjoyed it as much as we did. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.